Something just happened on the front line in Ukraine that has never happened before in the history of human warfare. Not once. Not in the First World War. Not in the Second. Not in Vietnam, not in Iraq, not in Afghanistan. And when President Volodymyr Zelensky stepped forward on April 13th to announce it to the world, even the most hardened Western military analysts had to pause and read the statement twice to make sure they understood what they were looking at. Ukrainian forces had just captured a fortified Russian position. They had taken Russian soldiers prisoner. They had seized and held the ground. And they had done all of it without sending a single human infantryman forward. Not one boot. Not one rifleman. The entire operation was carried out by ground robots and unmanned aerial drones working in perfect coordination. The Russians, terrified, starving, and outmaneuvered, threw up their hands and surrendered to machines. And what we're about to walk you through is not a publicity stunt. It is not a staged event for the cameras. This is the moment the battlefield changed forever, and the Kremlin knows it. Stay with us, because the details the mainstream press has glossed over tell a far darker story for Moscow than anyone inside Russia is willing to admit out loud. Now let's walk through exactly what happened, because every single detail of this timeline matters. On April 13, 2026, the Office of the President of Ukraine published an official statement directly from Zelensky himself, confirming that a Russian-held position had fallen to an all-machine assault force. According to Newsweek's coverage published on the same day, the operation involved a coordinated push by unmanned ground vehicles known as UGVs and first-person view drones, or FPVs, working in tight synchronization. No Ukrainian soldier set foot on the contested ground until well after the Russian troops inside had already thrown down their weapons. Zelensky himself framed the moment with a single sentence that is already being quoted around the world. He declared, "The future is here, and it is already at the front." That is not hyperbole from a wartime president. That is a statement of verified technological reality confirmed by Fox News, by the National Interest, and by multiple Ukrainian state channels. Foreign policy reporting on April 13th interviewed Ukrainian field commanders who described this assault as the culmination of a strategic shift that has been quietly building inside the Ukrainian military for more than a year. Ukrainian ground robots, which were once used almost exclusively for logistics tasks like hauling ammunition, evacuating wounded soldiers, and delivering hot meals to forward positions, have now been transformed into the tip of the spear. They are not support tools anymore. They are the assault force. And Euromaidan Press, citing Ukrainian General Staff data, reported that Ukrainian UGVs completed roughly 9,000 combat and support missions in the month of March alone. 9,000 in a single month. A year ago, that number would have been considered science fiction. Today, it is the operational baseline, and it is climbing every single week. The commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces, General Oleksandr Syrsky, released official figures showing that Ukrainian UAV strikes inflicted 29% more damage on Russian forces in March compared to February. 29% month over month. That is not incremental improvement. That is exponential escalation. And according to United 24 Media's reporting on April 14th, the drones deployed in this historic capture operation included the Hornet FPV system, which has now been equipped with fully automated target recognition. That means the drone itself identifies the target, locks onto it, and strikes with minimal or even zero human input at the final moment of engagement. The Ukrainian operator sets the mission parameters. The algorithm takes it from there. And when it comes to the Russians on the receiving end of this technology, the effect is as psychological as it is physical. They cannot jam what no longer needs a radio link to complete its mission. They cannot outrun what sees them through thermal and optical sensors before they have any idea it is coming. But that is only the surface of what happened. The real story is what this single operation means for the entire war, and there are at least 4 layers we need to unpack, each one hitting Russia harder than the last. The first layer is the robots themselves, and the sheer variety Ukraine is now fielding is staggering to anyone who has been following this conflict from the beginning. The lineup of Ukrainian UGVs reads like a menu pulled from a science fiction novel. There is the Volaya, the Termit, the Ardal, the Ratel, the Protector, and the Snake. Each of these machines is engineered for a different tactical role. Some are designed to carry heavy machine guns and sweep Russian trench lines clean. Others are built to plant anti-personnel mines, deliver shaped explosive charges directly against bunker walls, or drag wounded Ukrainian soldiers back out of the kill zone without risking a single medic's life. And then there is the droid TW-7.62, which deserves special attention. This machine is equipped with artificial intelligence targeting systems and has already been credited with taking Russian soldiers prisoner in earlier engagements before this latest operation. It does not simply shoot at what moves. It assesses, it discriminates, it issues surrender demands. And the Russians, outclassed and surrounded by a weapon they cannot negotiate with, comply. According to Euromaidan Press, there are now more than 280 Ukrainian companies actively producing ground robots for the war effort. The average unit cost of one of these machines is less than $20,000. Let that figure sink in for a moment. For the price of a modest used car, Ukraine fields a weapon system that can destroy a Russian T-90 main battle tank worth $4.5 million. This is the asymmetry that Moscow has no answer for, and we'll be explaining exactly why that asymmetry is only going to widen in the months ahead. The second layer is the drone revolution sitting on top of the ground robot revolution, and the scale of it is almost impossible to overstate. Ukraine produced 4 million UAVs in 2025 alone, according to figures cited by multiple Western defense outlets. 4 million. In a single year from a single country that was written off as a lost cause by Western pundits back in February of 2022, Ukraine is now fielding roughly 30% more attack drones along the front line than Russia, a gap that continues to grow every month. But the raw numbers only tell half the story. The Hornet FPV drones used in the historic capture operation were fitted with loudspeakers, and the Ukrainian operators used those loudspeakers to broadcast surrender demands in Russian directly to the troops cowering in their dugouts below. Imagine the sheer terror of that moment from the Russian perspective. You are a Russian conscript. You have had no resupply in days. Your commanding officer has vanished. Your radio is jammed. And suddenly, out of the silence, a small buzzing machine hovers above your trench, and a disembodied voice in Russian orders you to drop your weapon and come out with your hands up. There is no visible enemy. There is no one to shoot back at. There is only the drone, and behind the drone, somewhere kilometers away, in a safe dugout, a Ukrainian operator watching you through a screen. The Kyiv Post has reported that Russian sources themselves have now admitted Ukrainian AI-guided drones are, in their own words, effectively impossible to jam. That is the reality on the ground. And this is where things start to get even more serious for Moscow. But before we get to that, this is a quick reminder that you're watching Russia Crisis Report. We bring you the full picture, not just the headlines. So hit subscribe to ensure you stay ahead of the curve. The third layer is what all of this means in the context of Ukraine's broader manpower situation. And this is where the strategic brilliance of Kyiv's approach becomes undeniable. Ukraine is a smaller country than Russia. That has always been true, and it will always be true. Moscow currently has roughly 700,000 troops deployed inside Ukrainian territory, and the Kremlin continues to feed that meat grinder with wave after wave of poorly trained conscripts pulled from remote regions. Ukraine, meanwhile, is dealing with an estimated 2 million men of fighting age who have either fled the country entirely or are actively dodging mobilization inside it. On paper, this should be a losing demographic equation for Kyiv. On paper, Russia should be slowly winning through sheer weight of numbers. But Kyiv has done something truly extraordinary. Rather than throw its limited and precious manpower into the same kind of suicidal infantry assaults that the Russians keep launching and keep failing at Ukraine, has begun systematically removing human beings from the most dangerous roles on the battlefield. Logistics runs under fire. A robot does it now. Breaching a fortified trench line. A robot does it. Clearing minefields, a robot. Taking prisoners. As of April 13th, a robot does that too. This is the dehumanization of combat in the most literal and precise sense of that phrase. And the West is watching very, very carefully. NATO planners, according to Defense One's reporting on April 14th, are already studying the Ukrainian model closely and reaching the conclusion that Russian forces are simply incapable of matching this kind of decentralized, software-driven innovation. The Russian defense industry is still trying to build out domestic drones like the Supercam, as the state outlet TASS itself has boasted, but the Russians are years behind the curve and falling further behind every week. The fourth layer is what is happening to Russia's economic backbone at the exact same time all of this is going on, and it may be the most devastating blow of all. Throughout March and April of 2026, Ukrainian long-range drones, including one system that set a new record by striking targets 1,750 kilometers from Ukrainian territory, have been relentlessly pounding Russia's Baltic oil infrastructure. Bloomberg reported on March 31st that Russian oil exports have plunged by amounts costing the Kremlin more than $1 billion per week. The port of Primorsk alone lost approximately $200 million worth of crude oil to Ukrainian strikes in a single series of attacks. The facilities being targeted process as much as 45% of Russia's total oil exports. Read that percentage again, 45%. The Moscow Times, one of the very few remaining independent Russian outlets, has confirmed the damage at both Primorsk and Ust-Luga and reported that Baltic oil exports dropped by 43% in a single week of Ukrainian strikes. 43% in 1 week. This is not a rounding error in a budget spreadsheet. This is a national economy being surgically dismantled from the air, while on the ground, the army that is supposed to defend that economy is being dismantled by cheap robots, costing less than $20,000 a unit. The humiliation for Moscow is compounding by the day, and Russian economists who dare to speak publicly are starting to use the word catastrophe. Now let's talk about what Russia is actually doing in response to all of this, because the contrast is almost embarrassing to put in writing. The primary Russian countermeasure against Ukrainian robotics is electronic warfare, or EW. Russian EW systems have genuinely forced Ukrainian software developers to push firmware updates to their robots on an almost monthly basis to stay ahead of Russian jamming. That is a real challenge and credit where credit is due. Russian EW operators are among the most sophisticated in the world. But here is the fatal problem for Moscow. Ukraine updates. Ukraine adapts. Ukraine has over 280 private companies iterating their designs in real time, competing with each other, sharing combat data, and pushing new software versions directly to field units within weeks. Russia, by contrast, has a centralized, bureaucratic, corruption-riddled state defense procurement system that moves at a glacial pace and cannot keep up. Meanwhile, Russian infantry tactics have degraded to the point of absurdity. They now rely on small group infiltration attempts, essentially sending 2 or 3 soldiers forward on a motorcycle or on foot, hoping to sneak past Ukrainian drone coverage. On March 8, 2026, the Russians attempted a small mechanized column attack on Hulya-Pola, and the entire column was destroyed, wiped out. Not damaged, not forced to retreat, but completely annihilated before it could even reach the Ukrainian line. And according to data compiled from Ukraine's E-Points combat tracking system, March of 2026 saw more than 35,300 confirmed Russian casualties, a record number that speaks for itself. Donetsk, specifically, is now being described by Ukrainian commanders as seeing Russian casualty rates at the highest sustained level of the entire war. Now, that is not even the worst part for Moscow. Euromaidan Press reported on April 13th that Russian tank crews are now being ordered to keep their vehicles parked roughly 20 kilometers behind the front line at all times, because Ukrainian drones will find and destroy any piece of armor that dares to move forward into range. 20 kilometers. That is so far back that Russian armor can no longer provide effective fire support to Russian infantry in contact. On April 14th, a desperate letter from a Russian tanker serving in the 110th Motorized Rifle Brigade was leaked and posted on Telegram, describing the hopelessness of trying to operate armor in the face of Ukrainian drone swarms. The letter described crews watching friends die, tanks burning before they could even engage, and commanders refusing to send new vehicles forward. And by April 16th, Ukraine had publicly confirmed that Russia has now lost a total of 11,866 tanks since the beginning of the full-scale invasion in February of 2022. 11,866. A pre-war Russian military analyst would have called that number physically impossible. Today, it is simply the running total, updated weekly, climbing higher by the hour. So what does all of this mean for the bigger picture of the war? It means that the era of mass infantry warfare, the kind that Russia has been trying to wage since February of 2022, is functionally over. Ukraine has found the answer to Russia's endless human waves, and the answer is machines. Cheap machines, fast machines, adaptive machines. Swarming machines operated by a decentralized network of more than 280 private companies, all of them innovating in real time, all of them sharing combat data, all of them driven by the existential urgency of a nation fighting for its survival. Russia cannot match this pace. It cannot match this price point. It cannot match this software development velocity. And the Kremlin's only remaining structural advantage, which was raw manpower, is being steadily neutralized by drones and robots that never get tired, never desert, never complain, never need to be paid, and never refuse an order. The psychological dimension of all of this cannot be overstated. When Russian soldiers surrender to a machine, what they are really surrendering to is the crushing realization that their side has fallen so far behind technologically that the gap can no longer be closed. They are surrendering to hopelessness itself. They are surrendering to the understanding that their commanders have sent them into a war where the enemy does not even bother showing up in person anymore, because the enemy does not need to. And when that realization spreads through the ranks, and it is spreading fast, the entire Russian war effort begins to crumble from the inside out. Letters like the one from the 110th Brigade tanker are not isolated incidents. They are the first visible cracks in a dam that is about to burst. Russian soldiers are starting to understand what their political leadership refuses to admit. They are losing. They are losing badly. And the machines coming over the ridgeline are not going to stop. What comes next could change absolutely everything. Ukraine is not slowing down after this single operation. General Syrskyi has made it publicly clear that fully autonomous ground assault is now an officially endorsed Ukrainian military doctrine, no longer an experimental program, no longer a niche capability. We can expect to see more captures exactly like this one on progressively larger scales across more and more sectors of the front line. The Moscow Times quoted Russian military experts who tried to downplay the April 13th capture as a public relations move. But even those same experts were forced to admit that the tactical and strategic implications are real and growing. Russia, for its part, has no coherent counter-doctrine to offer. It has rhetoric. It has jamming, which is increasingly ineffective. It has casualty reports it refuses to publish. But it has no answer. And as the summer campaign season approaches, the Kremlin is staring at a battlefield where every single square kilometer of attempted advance costs more Russian lives and more Russian equipment than Moscow can afford to lose. The math is no longer working for Vladimir Putin. It has not been working for a long time. But now, for the first time, the robots are making that fact impossible to hide from the Russian public and impossible to spin on state television. And what happens when the Russian people finally see the truth is a question that should keep the Kremlin awake at night. If you want to understand the full scope of what Ukraine is building and how it is reshaping modern warfare, make sure to check out our previous coverage on Ukraine's long-range drone campaign and the collapse of Russia's Baltic oil exports. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to Russia Crisis Report to see more of our coverage of the Ukrainian robotic revolution and the war that is rewriting the rules of modern combat. And thank you, as always, for watching.